Antonio Guterres were also on the panel.
Oh, good to know.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today for our side event to the fourth international conference on financing for development. We have interpretation available in this meeting in French and Spanish. So down on the taskbar, you will see one globe icon. If you press it, you can select your preferred language. I would also paste these instructions in the chat box. So please feel free to connect to interpretation to either French or Spanish if that is what you prefer. Thank you so much.
Welcome to this side event at the fourth International Financing for Development taking place in a blazing heat of Seville. And we are really at a very critical juncture. And this side event, titled Advancing Inclusive Development Through Accountable and People-Centered Social Protection, is being co-organized by the Inclusivity Project, Ergo, European Roma Grassroots Organization, the Asia Dalit Rights Forum, CONAC, which is the Confederation of Quilombola National Organizations from Brazil, and the Africa National Coalition of Discriminated Communities, and Eurodad, and also the International Budget Partnerships. This is a critical time and a juncture across the globe. We are confronting the weight of the overlapping and crises, the deepening conflicts and wars that are happening, the shrinking space, fiscal space, not only civil society, but the fiscal space, huge debt burdens, and the sustainability of the debt. And there is a massive sustainable development finance, at least a conservative estimate is about $4 trillion a year. And of course, the climate emergency and the climate finance and adaptation. And also amidst all this, a steeply escalating inequality. And these are not just at the global level, at the mega level, but these are actually impacting people as we go through this. And especially, it impacts those communities within these countries who have long sustained structural discrimination for no fault of theirs, just because of their social birth and the occupations they have been forced into, called communities discriminated on work and descent, or descent communities. And this promise of development that we see is really very, very much eludes them as we go. So this movement, very depressing as it seems, can it also offer an opportunity for us to push for certain policies, certain measures, which can reimagine not only how we finance development, but to whom the development serves? How do we ensure these decisions? And amidst all this, civil society does have a very critical, however much the nations and the governments are in a dilemma. I think we have a response to push and to pull towards a direction that can ensure an equity and inclusion. We have a real star-studded speakers as we are going, and it's necessary to ensure that we keep to time. So I will just introduce all of them once, and then quickly as they begin to speak. We're very privileged to have the Special Rapporteur for Right to Development, Professor Surya Deva. He's currently based in Australia in the bubble of the winter cold. And he has been a champion of a right to development, but with a focus on those who are at the margins. How do you bring the margins to the center? We then have Nadire Redpai, a Roma entrepreneur and a Roma women expert on economic development. Thank you very much for being with us. She brings the concerns from the experiences of how the entrepreneurship, however hard it may be, is still a major issue for several millions across not just Europe, but also there are several of those who are across, Canada, Latin America, and in other countries and continents. And we have Ms. Baishali Lahiri, who is the project director in ILO in India, and she's an expert on social protection, and she has been engaging with us in South Asia and looking at what are the possible measures to ensure that we have a very effective social protection flows. And we're very fortunate to have Olenka Babalola, who is the International Budget Partnerships Country Director for Nigeria. And she brings in the African perspective of how these countries and within the countries, the vulnerable are to be focused on and what measures are really needed. And finally, we have Ms. Kendra Jesperson from Eurodat. She's a senior director and has been at the forefront of the campaign for debt relief and still a very solid campaigner across the world and ensuring that it really affects the most marginalized in each of these countries. So we have a star-studded speakers. I request all of you to ensure that you have the interpretation on and request the speakers on the time that has been allocated. And Pranjali and I will try to keep the time to ensure that we have some time for Q&A. So may I request now Professor Surya Deva, the Special Rapporteur on Right to Development, to share his critical perspective as he has a very wide overarching experience on this. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Paul. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. So it's really wonderful to join this virtual event on the very first day of the FFD4. And I'm very glad to be able to join this with a very distinguished and diverse group of experts joining this conversation. And thank you for convening this, and thank you for the invitation. So, Paul, in my brief remarks, I would like to focus on three aspects. I would like to build a little bit on the context within which this FFD4 is taking place, and I think you alluded to that already. So I'm going to expand a bit on what you mentioned in terms of the poly crisis within which this international conference is taking place in Spain. Then I will talk about the right to development and what relevance, value addition this right can provide in this particular context of inclusive development and in the context of social protection. And finally, I will make some remarks in relation to the final draft of the outcome document that has been released. So let me start with the poly crisis. I think if you look around, the picture looks definitely very gloomy. We have the highest number of conflicts that the world has seen since the Second World War. And we are spending significant resources in fighting these conflicts and wars. The estimate is that $2.7 trillion dollars were spent on military expenses last year. And based on the early indications, this may go higher in 25 and beyond. You may have seen the NATO meeting where the push is to spend 5% of the GDP on military expenses. So no one is talking about social protection, no one is talking about climate adaptation mitigation funds, but yes, we should spend more on military expenses. And I can buy this investment if it delivers peace. The challenge I see is that the more military expenses do not necessarily result in more peace. So that is my first remark and frustration with this policy direction that the world is seeing. In addition to this, we have a serious climate crisis that is unfolding, and I think the heat wave in Europe, including in Spain, where this fourth international conference is taking place, is a testimony to that. So how do we deal with that? But in addition to this climate crisis, or we can also call it triple planetary crisis, we see a significant rise in the cost of living. And that again impacts people who are left behind, marginalized from the development process. Then we have shrinking civic space, because if people would like to protest, they would like to challenge these development policies and decisions and projects, they are termed as anti-national. They are arrested and jailed for dissenting against decisions taken by governments and multinational corporations. And that creates definitely a very challenging situation. And of course, Paul, you mentioned about the debt crisis. Many developing countries, they're spending more resources on paying their debt than on education, than on housing, health, or anything of that nature. So that is definitely, again, a very serious challenge that we are dealing with. And last but not least, we are seeing a significant collapse of the multilateral system and the global order that was built after the Second World War. It is being incrementally dismantled for certain states for vested interest. So in this gloomy time, what should we do? And my view is that crises like this also offer an opportunity to rebuild and create better alternatives that can save not only the world, but also the future generations. And with this in mind, let me try to highlight how right to development, if it is properly understood in the context of its normative foundations, can provide a pathway of hope. Now, right to development, in my view, is one of the most transformative human rights. It's transformative because it seeks to address the historical injustices of all kinds, whether these are raised by colonization or any kind of discrimination. And it seeks to build a fair international economic order that I think we need, because if we are having these crises, one reason is that the international order is not working for everyone. And with this in mind, there are many aspects of the right to development that can provide us the tools to move forward. And I will not be exhaustive, but I will provide some examples to illustrate my point. The first is participation. Right to development demands that every person is able to participate, not consultation merely, participation. And the participation in decision making has to be active, free, and meaningful. And I think this is missing. If you look at the decision making processes at the government levels, even at the UN level, I would say, often there are consultations, but participation, bottom up participation, is not happening. And I think if we can reassert and reclaim that people have this right to participate in those decision making processes in a very inclusive manner, that will be very, very significant milestone and important step. Then this right to development also talks about fair distribution. A reference was made to growing inequalities. And I think the growing inequalities can be tackled if we deal with fair distribution. Who is benefiting from the current economic order and business models? If we take a simple example, the cocoa farmers in Africa, in Latin America, from where the cocoa beans are coming, they're trapped in poverty. But the multinationals who are selling chocolates are extremely rich. So how do we ensure that the value is shared equitably amongst all the contributors whenever any goods are made or things are produced? So fair distribution is an equally relevant aspect of the right to development. Then this right also underscores the importance of disarmament. I mentioned a little while ago that how much resources were spent in military expenses last year and continue to be done this year. If we can practice disarmament, these resources can be used for social protection. These can be used for climate mitigation and adaptation. And these can be diverted to achieve sustainable development goals. And we have more than 80% of these goals not being met. So I think we face definitely a significant challenge on this particular nature. And right to development, again, provides a pathway to achieve this. The last example I would like to give is about international cooperation. Right to development underscores that these challenges require cooperation amongst the states, and it need not be merely North and South collaboration, but South and South collaboration, or the triangular cooperation that is needed. We need cooperation in terms of financing, but also capacity building, peer learning, sharing of technologies. And I think without this cooperation, it will be very difficult to achieve the goals, sustainable development goals, or even overcome the crises that I was referring to. Now, let me briefly mention the outcome document in relation to this, the focus of this event, the social protection aspect, and the relevance of inclusive development. As participants would know that the final draft acknowledges non-discrimination, at least in two paragraphs, paragraph 3 and 12, very clearly, that all freedoms, all fundamental rights and human rights must be ensured and preserved without any distinction and discrimination of any kind. And that will definitely include some of the issues that we're talking about here, the discrimination based on caste or other descent or based on work that Paul was referring to. Then it also makes very explicit provisions about social protection, the final draft. But I would like to make 3 points here quickly. First is that if we have to operationalize this document that will be adopted very soon, we need to go back to the national level. And that's where the laws and policies have to operationalize these aspirational goals agreed collectively at the international level. Secondly, we will need international cooperation to ensure this. If social protection in global south, in developing countries has to be achieved, international cooperation in terms of financing for development will be very, very critical. And I think the document acknowledges that. Finally, something that can be harnessed more, in my view, is the role of the private sector. Private sector is benefiting from many business models and economic order that we currently have. And I think they have to contribute resources, their know-how, their innovation, the capacity building and technologies to ensure that the social protection is available to everyone. And my last point is that, and that connects with what Paul was mentioning, that's not merely about financing but development, but for whom we're talking about this. So the report that I'm currently writing, which will be presented in New York in October, is financing for inclusive, sustainable, and participatory development. So in my view, the development model has to be inclusive. It cannot leave anyone behind. It has to be sustainable because if we are not able to secure the environment and the planet for all of us and the future generations, this development is not worth pursuing, in my view. And finally, it has to be participatory. And I think that is, again, the value that the right to development can bring to this conversation. So thank you very much once again for convening this side event and giving me the invitation. I will be happy to wrap it up for now, but happy to take any questions later on. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Professor Surya. Very succinct, and you stayed within the 15-minute time. Actually, you've given us 3 more minutes in this, but very succinctly, I think you have sharpenly, very clearly said the kind of armament and the escalation of the defense spend, which almost equals to the gap of sustainable development financing. And with all this, we are not buying peace, but more destruction and de-development that is taking place. And also, you're pressing the whole aspect of fair trade, I think, which is very, very important in ensuring that the producers and all the stakeholders who have been making this wealth are not excluded from the fruits of their labor, but are also partake in the fruits of the development that are being given. And the whole aspect of social protection with non-discrimination is a very, very critical aspect that you have brought. And finally, I think we're really looking forward to your report of ensuring inclusive, participatory, and equitable development. That's the kind of framework I think we need to have. And really thank you and for being there and then speaking truth to these decision makers as they are trying to have another declaration, which I hope will really sink. As you rightly said, we need to bring in the traction in each of our countries, wherever we are from, taking this again to the policymakers and to the companies and the corporate, to ensure that we demand an inclusive, participatory, and equitable right to development. Thank you very much, and I'm glad that you're giving us the time to stay through this, and I'm sure there'll be questions towards the end. And we're very happy to have, as I've already said, Nadire Redpi. I'm not pronouncing the name properly, and I'm sure you will introduce the name clearly. And as you reflect on these, what Professor Surya has said and your experience, and also look at the commitments within the Financing for Development agenda, could you share some innovative examples? You are a Roma entrepreneur, and what have been the ways in which the barriers you've had to face, the challenges specifically of the Roma communities who are driving development through entrepreneurial initiatives, and what specific challenges that you continue to face in accessing financial services, and also some insights on how you're overcoming and your organization is working to address these challenges. Because as Professor Surya has said, unless we drive this agenda within the nations and come up with some initiatives which can get us past through this, we are still, may have the policy, but it's not really functioning at the ground level. Over to you, Nadire.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be part of this side event discussion and to share my experience actually on economic development of Roma communities. And for the beginning, I would like to start with the existing situation. I think the professor gave a very clear picture about the existing global crisis, climate conflicts, debt, and inequality that is happening in the world. And what I would say that whatever we see today, it's nothing new for Roma communities and other descent-based communities, because exclusion from all the systematic barriers was something that we have seen with many years before our generations. And today in my speech, I want to share a bit different perspective than the issues that we are facing. And I will talk firstly about Roma people, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a solution waiting to be unlocked. So I will share some good practices from my experience on creating an ecosystem for economic development of Roma as an example, which could be scaled to other distant communities, because I believe there are many other also successful stories that we are looking to learn from each other, and we could actually scale up this type of different models in different countries, because the issues we are facing are all same. So I would start with the first fact that one of the most persistent myths about Roma, when you speak about investments, is that Roma are risky category for investments. And in my experience, especially through the Roma Entrepreneurship Development Initiative, we proved that this is not true. We show that Roma are not a risk, but a missed opportunity. They are untapped customers, entrepreneurs, and contributors to growth, held back not by their capacity, but by systematic exclusion. And I want to share what actually we did. How did we prove this? So we built first a model that created an enabling environment for Roma entrepreneurs to grow by using 3 key tools, because the issues that Roma are facing are multidimensional, and we cannot fix them by using just one tool. One of the tools was creating a fund for Roma entrepreneurs, which provided debt capital to microfinance institutions with the requirement to lend to Roma-owned businesses. The second tool was a network of Roma NGOs supporting local capacity building, mapping the needs of the Roma entrepreneurs, training Roma entrepreneurs, creating new cadre of Roma loan officers, mentorship and other support programs that was directly given through the network of the NGOs. And the third tool was aggregators and social enterprises, which is creating solutions to local challenges such as recycling and reinvesting into Roma communities for sustainability. And all of these 3 tools were actually very much interlinked to each other, that could support sustainability of the beneficiaries that are part of the loans and are part of any of the programs that we were providing. So this model demonstrated one thing clearly. When Roma are trusted and supported, they create jobs, drive innovations, and contribute to inclusive growth. With this model, the fund unlocked finance, the NGO built the knowledge and the trust, and the aggregators created long-term value in the communities. I have to say it was very challenging while building this model. And the most important barriers that the Roma communities faced when we started and are still facing is having a bad loan history. And this is one of the main reasons why people cannot access to funds. Having no collateral to show when applying for funds, or being part of the informal system, because we know most of the businesses are run informally and they are not eligible to apply for formally allowed financial loans by the big banks. And this is why microfinance are one of the solutions for the informal businesses owned by the Roma entrepreneurs. I believe this is a full package that could be implemented in other regions, because these multidimensional tools are in a way showing that people can start with their dreams, because they have this entrepreneurial spirit, and they can become sustainable and grow the economic development within the community. Because when the business is growing, new job opportunities are open, and then there is a big possibility that the person will hire someone from the Roma community. So in this way, we build the economic development in the specific community. But on the other side, I want to speak also, my second point is on the importance of the government partnership, because no matter how innovative solutions we are bringing as a civil society, we cannot do it alone. So government partnership is essential. So after COVID-19, we tried to scale the model through public-private partnership matching funds with the governments of Serbia and North Macedonia. And in Serbia, we succeeded. The government allocated 1 million euro. The Postal Saving Bank provided the loans to Roma entrepreneurs, and we worked with Roma entrepreneurs offering mentorship, training, and business planning. In North Macedonia, the government signed a matching fund agreement with us, but due to political shifts, it was never implemented. So this experience taught us something critical. Solutions already exist. The issue is not innovation. What is often missing is political will. And taking this message, what we can see, I would put it as a question: how do governments see us? Are we, do they see us as a problem or a solution? Because what we see today, too often, when labor shortages arise, governments look abroad and import labor. But what about the untapped labor force within their own borders? There are thousands of young, capable Roma women and men who are eager to work, to start businesses, to contribute, but they remain excluded from the employment programs, especially those run by national employment agencies, which rarely include tailored support for Roma or other descent-based communities. So the real question becomes, do governments see us as a burden or as a solution? Because if they are serious about inclusive and sustainable development, then investing in Roma communities is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And then, while speaking about the role of the FFD process, this is the moment to ask the questions that Paul, you also introduced in the beginning. Who are we building systems for? Whose voices shape those systems? And who is missing from the room? And this is very important to know what we are doing, because civil society on our side is ready. We have piloted, proven, and scaled solutions, but without government partnership and accountability, we hit a ceiling. So my general message would be, let's shift the mindset from charity to investment, from exclusion to opportunity, and from silence to shared prosperity. Because Roma people and all descent-based communities are not standing in the way of development, so we are the missing piece of all. So there should be more allocation of resources towards Roma and other descent-based communities to see the real impact and economic growth in the world. So policy is very linked to the political will, and without the government support, we have very much limitations of what we can realize and how far we can solve the issue. The issues should be solved actually by the governments, and we can just support them realizing the real impacts that they are willing. And access to finance is the key actually in developing further the economies and for bringing the relative inclusion in all the decision-making processes within the economies. Thank you very much. So I remain open for questions. I believe there are many other good examples from the experiences and all the programs that we have developed in the region here in Balkans and Europe.
Thank you so much, Nadire. Very, very powerful. Asserting we are not a problem, but if you don't recognize us, it is a missed opportunity for inclusive development. And especially, I think these efforts from the community and ensuring that we have our own tools that you have very clearly mentioned of advocacy, of ensuring that we have a network and ensuring that there is a capital to fall back on and to lift us through the debt. And several of these are really powerful examples. And you said, of course, there are many more. And I am in touch with your organization, Roma Litico, and heard so much about it and the kind of innovative interventions that you're making, not just on the charity as civil society, but also as an entrepreneur and building entrepreneurial models across the Balkans for the marginalized communities, Roma. Thank you very much, Nadire. For some of those participants who are not very aware, these systems of social origin, many of you think it is only in South Asia with the caste or it's in Roma with the Europe, but you have very much also across the continent, across the world, with Africa, several communities being pushed into exclusion because of pre-colonial systems of exclusion, who have completely impoverished generations upon generations, a whole lot of communities in several countries, and we will also hear about it. But also in Latin America and others, and we call ourselves descent communities or communities discriminated on work and descent, that is social origin, and because of that being pushed into so-called unclean occupations, but without which the world, I think, will collapse if we actually refuse to work for a single day. But because of these, you're further victimized by saying you're the one who has to stay outside. And yeah, thank you very much, Nadire, for taking the time to very powerfully prepare these. And now, as I have already shared, we are very fortunate to have from International Labour Organization, Baishali, who has been part of this designing inclusive, shock responsive social protection measures. And yes, you are presenting through a PowerPoint, and I request you to carry on with Pranjali helping with the presentation. Yes, over to you, please, Pranjali.
Thank you, Paul. If I may share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Thank you so much.
If you could just put it on slideshow, I think that will be great.
Yeah. Oops. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this panel discussion. So I have been requested to present on designing inclusive, shock responsive social protection. So social protection, as we all know, probably everyone in the room is aware, is a framework or set of measures which safeguards people from any unforeseen events that may have detrimental impacts on working and living conditions. Social protections are designed to reduce poverty, build resilience in community, and promote social cohesion by preventing social unrest and conflict. And they are supposed to also promote trust in statehood. Now, let me give two examples of social protection from India and Africa, which had significant impact on the well-being of the communities here. In India, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act ensures 100 days of paid employment annually, and it has directly reduced poverty by boosting income and livelihood security for almost 50 million poor households. Similarly, in Kenya, we have the Inua Jamii cash transfer program, which provides regular financial support to vulnerable communities and lifted many households out of extreme poverty by providing them access to food security and basic services. In 2021, the International Labour Organization aimed to expand the social protection coverage by 2% by the end of the year of 2025. And as Mr. Professor Surya Deva also mentioned that social protection in the time of climate crisis, increasing conflict across borders, become more important than ever. And also, let us try to understand why in this ambit of things or ecosystem of things, why are some communities left behind than others in availing social protection system? Mostly because some communities traditionally and structurally has been discriminated than others. They have been discriminated on the basis of prevailing social and economic biasness. And because they have been discriminated, they have poor representation, agency, and voice, even in the legal systems in their countries. And because they have poor representation, they are overtly present in the poorer systems, meaning they are working as informal workers. Women are also not recognized for their unpaid care workers, and there are many population who do not have any document that can prove their identity and entitlement to certain country or state. There are several who are currently stateless. And what we have understood in from our various studies and also our engagement with social partners is that social access to social protection is not only a matter of poverty of schemes or rules. In one of the recent study that our project or ILO concluded, we found that 76% of the informal workers or domestic workers, for example, in the state of Bihar, have been have heard of eShram portal, which is a national database for registering informal workers and also give some access to certain kind of social protection. So around 76% of the domestic workers were aware of eShram portal, yet only 46% of them were registered to the portal. And be it this study or any other study globally or nationally, what we learn from those studies is that there is a rampant lack there is a lack of awareness and there is lack of documentation which can help these workers or people to be registered in national social protection system. And also there is residential and digital exclusion. For example, some of the social protection systems might also require producing domicile certificate, which many of the migrant workers may not have. Also,
Vaishali,
yes.
sorry to interpret. The slides are not moving, at least for few of us. Is it possible to see? Are you?
I'm on the third side, Paul.
Okay,
If,
but
okay.
in the full in what is
Okay.
being projected, it's not moving. So is it possible to just
So can anyone help me
Anjali?
change the slide? If then I'll stop sharing.
Yeah,
Anjali?
sure, I can do that.
Okay. Can you kindly come on the third slide, please?
Yeah, just a little bit I'll do it.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I think in the meantime you can go ahead, please.
Okay. So what we understand that from our various study is that for accessing the social protection system, people also need digital authentication as well for validation of their identity. And what we have typically seen with women workers or people from poorer households is that cell phones are usually kept with the male members of the family. and households, poorer households may have only one cell phone in the entire family, so which actually excludes the vulnerable population even more. Therefore, what we understand is that caste, gender, disability interact differently with social protection to have differentiated outcomes even for the very vulnerable population. And when we are talking about informal workers or informal or people engaged in informal economy, please remember it's not an homogeneous group. Can you kindly come to the, yes, this is fine. So can you come to the next slide, please, the inclusion imperative? Yes. So what we see that people from certain communities, like Paul mentioned in his lecture, is that Dalits, particularly in South Asia, like countries in India, Bangladesh, are represented or overrepresented in certain sections of occupation, for example, the cleaning sector. And because they are discriminated, and also because they do not have access to quality education throughout their life cycle, they overpopulate in the informal sector, primarily in those kind of occupation which are viewed by the general public, government and stakeholders as occupations which do not require much skill. For example, the cleaning and sanitation sector. People here are categorized as unskilled workers. But I would try to justify a case from Japan where, after a devastating earthquake, Japanese government had to seek the help of the Filipino sanitation workers who were essentially migrant to the country to manage the devastating effects of the earthquake. They possess the skill and experience of managing the debris that came out of the earthquake. And since then, Japanese government has recognized the sanitation workers as skilled workers. So these are the examples which showcase how societies view certain occupation as non-essential or that of low skill, but yet in given circumstances, they might be severely essential occupations. The only thing is it lacks is the recognition it must get. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the next question, which I am here to answer today, how should social protection systems be designed to be more inclusive? Obviously, social protection system should have a universal um, coverage and should also have a life cycle approach, which can lead to comprehensive development of a household or of a worker. For example, the building and other construction workers welfare scheme, popularly known as POCW scheme in India, is one such example of comprehensive life cycle based social protection that is offered to construction workers and his or her household. And we need more flexibility when it comes to designing scheme for informal workers. Clearly, the need of a domestic worker is very different from a need of a sanitation worker or a home-based worker. So we need more flexibility, more tailored schemes, etc. And more affirmative actions are needed to promote anti-discrimination. For example, in India, we have guaranteed rights for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities who have been traditionally excluded, and they, since independence, they have been guaranteed access to public elementary and higher education systems, and they have certain reservation to promote their well-being in the education, in the national education systems, and also they enjoy certain due recognition and reservation in the public sector employment as well, which is a very essential and good step forward towards this direction. And registration towards social protection needs to be more community led, more decentralized. Access needs to be promoted, and obviously whatever system is designed, it should be data backed and evidence backed, like Miss Nadire showcased how Roma entrepreneurs are have been traditionally unable to access the formal financial systems because of lack of collaterals. And therefore, it's very important that we have more flexible systems in place that adopt and address the need of the local community. And next
Vaishali,
slide, please. Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but you may need to wrap up. Last 1
Sure.
minute.
Last slide, please. And what can, I think the role of civil society organization was the one. Yeah. So what civil society organizations can do? Civil society organizations should represent the voice of the community, which needs to feed into the national level policy and programmatic measures. And this is something the civil society organization across the world has been doing. But what I think is more needed is to promote coalition and allyship at the local, national, and international level. And one of the need of the time is to promote robust monitoring system by using social audits and citizens report card as tools to monitor the progress and development of different welfare programs. And the last measure, which and more important measure, which is actually taken in India, is recrossing to the courts and raising cases under the public interest litigation system, which in India has been an effective tool to bring out exemplary judgments that has promoted social cohesion. Thank you so much. The last slide highlighted that social protection is not a charity, it is a right, and social protection to be inclusive to be universal must be inclusive by design and equitable in practice. Thank you so much.
Sorry to hurry you, Vaishali, but I think it is very, very, very incisive and also important recommendations that you have given. Also, some good practices that already some of the civil society are doing across the world, in India, and also, as you cited, Nadire, Roma Litico, and several other organizations. But I think this is very important. What I feel, what you have really brought out is that in addition to the mega and the meta picture and the policies, unless we design specific interventions from the perspective of these vulnerable communities, whatever is the policies or even allocations in terms of budgets are to not, they will not be able to have any impact on the ground. And also, what you have mentioned in terms of the Japanese experience, you term them as scavengers or sanitation workers, and you treat them as unskilled labor. That's the, completely denying the expertise and the courage sometimes they brought. You've seen that also in the COVID. The people who are at the front end are these communities who have maintained in such a way that the pandemic did not result in a huge catastrophic because of the health, attendance and the sanitation expertise which they have provided. But unless you recognize them as skilled experts, the perspective is not there, and you will continue to treat them and you don't figure them as part of the inclusive planning and actions that need to see them as a whole, not as a problem. I think that we have seen, and the kind of things you have said, that social inclusion and social protection is not a charity, it's a right, and it has to be seen as an inclusive right to development. Thank you very much. And one of the organizations which Olenka Babalola, who is the International Budget Partnerships Country Director for Nigeria, they are very famous globally for these report cards and for audits which they do on governance. So really, what you're saying is passes on to the next speaker. And Olenka, I invite you. At the heart of inclusive development lies a simple but powerful truth. Who gets to decide how money is spent, and who gets to actually reap the benefit? A critical starting point there is the production of robust, disaggregated data for marginalized communities. So my questions to you: how can intersectional, disaggregated data on marginalized communities be leveraged to ensure more equitable and accountable public finance decisions, from revenue generation to expenditure allocation, particularly for social protection programs? It's a long question, but that's only the first one. The second one is, and crucially, what more needs to be done to ensure that marginalized groups such as Roma, Dalit, Haratin, Osu, as they're called in Nigeria, and other marginalized communities have both the information and power to influence how social protection and development budgets are designed, allocated, and monitored. Over to you. You have 10 minutes. We want to leave some time for Q&A. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on this very distinguished panel. I think so far, if we reflect on the conversation and the interventions by the previous speakers, and when I speak, you find out that we are all singing from the same hymn book to a large extent. So just to place this in context that has been mentioned previously, right now we're in a situation where there's a shrinking fiscal space and rising debt levels across the world in various countries. And so this gives us an opportunity to take a keener interest in how public finance decisions are being made, because now we have less funds to go around. So on this question of intersectional disaggregated data, just to say that in the resolution by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on the promotion and protection of the rights of communities discriminated based on work and descent, it urges the promotion and the protection of the rights of those facing this discrimination, including through robust disaggregated data collection in line with data protection and privacy principles. So this discussion is extremely relevant for us. I would like to start from saying, firstly, we have to acknowledge that data is not neutral. Data is highly political. And in many countries in the global south and even in the global north as well, data on the potential recipients of social protection programs or even social sector spending, where there is a service delivery, for example, to specific communities, that data can be hijacked by politicians, as instruments for distributing political patronage. We see that happening a lot in Nigeria and other countries around the world. And therefore, we have to take an interest in how this data is collected, who is represented in the data, and how it affects public financial decisions. So I have to emphasize that intersectional disaggregated data is how we name those people that are routinely forgotten. And if those people are not counted, they do not count in public finance decisions. Secondly, through the data, we make the communities visible. And then we also acknowledge that they own this data. Previous speakers have spoken about how the communities must be involved in public finance decisions. And the first step is to make sure that they own the data being collected. And so there's a need to work with marginalized communities to collect this intersectional data that describes the various categories of marginalization, with different identity markers. And we try to do that at IBP through our various programs by having not just the gender focus, but going beyond gender to intersectionality, because although we recognize that women and girls tend to be the most marginalized groups, we have to understand that even within that group of women and girls, there are some people that are more marginalized than others. It could be through their income level, disability, and, belonging to a particular ethnic group that is pushed to the fringes of society. And so, even in our work, we try to actually go deeper to surface these intersections so that we ensure that the most marginalized are being reached and that intersections are designed to address their specific needs. And then we must also collect that data with the participation of government and other stakeholders. In the past, in our work at IBP, we were satisfied with changes at the margins, right? So for example, a particular group that is advocating for a specific change gets an increased budget allocation, but we find that a lot of these changes are short-lived. So we've taken what we call a systems change approach, which means that we're looking for long-lasting and sustainable change, and that requires forming a broad coalition of other stakeholders. And so, for example, when we're collecting data, we have to involve government, even right from the very beginning, because this data, we want government to use the data in making decisions about the allocation of resources. And so they must also be involved in the collection so that they own the data as well. Although the data belongs primarily to the communities, we need to bring government in so that they can use that data to inform decisions on how resources are allocated. And we've seen several examples of this working well. For example, in our tax equity work, through this data collection, through the research, we're able to shift a lot of narratives, wrong narratives. For example, narratives that say that the poor do not pay taxes, for example, because what we find out is that as a percentage of their income, the poor actually pay more than, people that are more advantaged in terms of financial resources. And, narratives that say that the tax system is gender blind, for example, because we've seen that even things like who collects the taxes and how they interact with the people they're collecting taxes from is very important. Because, for example, in Nigeria, we found through a gender and taxation study we did that in areas where we have a lot of male tax collectors, they're very aggressive and violent in the way they collect taxes from people. And then even what we define as taxes, for example, we find out that, in a lot of these marginalized communities, they're paying for services they're not receiving. So that's, an implicit tax as well. And so it's very important that we use this data to shine a light on what's really happening within the community so that we can begin to see changes. We can see them really put in the center when decisions on public finance are being made. And then to the second question about what needs to be done to ensure that marginalized groups have the information and power to influence how budgets are designed, allocated, and monitored. I think, first of all, we have to understand that these groups have agency. This has been reiterated over and over again. They have their own stories, they have their own information, they understand how these decisions affect their lives and which services they would prefer to receive. And so as civil society, we should come alongside them to amplify their stories and experiences to decision makers. And then, we're talking about public finance, which tends to be very jargony. A lot of people don't understand a lot of the terms, a lot of the data, that surrounds public finance decisions. And so we should also come alongside them to actually simplify a lot of this information and reduce the opacity, because a lot of times government deliberately withholds information. And so we should act as the bridge to give access to marginalized communities so that they can understand how these decisions are being made. And by doing this, what we're doing is increasing the bargaining power of communities, because knowledge is power, information is power. And so when we make that knowledge accessible to them, they're able to form broad reform coalitions with other stakeholders to begin to shift things and to begin to shift the mindsets of public policy makers. We see this in our work, our SPARK work, strengthening public accountability for results and knowledge, but by which we empower community-based organizations to actually have a voice, to have a seat at the table on public finance decisions. And we also do this by, facilitating entry to spaces where they typically would not, where decisions are being made, so they can have a seat at the table. And we can see the results of this because through our work, we've seen where women farmers from rural areas are actually incorporated into budget committees, where decisions are made on how agricultural inputs are distributed. So I'll just round up by saying that, look, it's important that we ask questions like, what exactly is being funded and for whom? And like I said previously, these are political questions. And so we have to come in as civil society to help bridge the gap, to enable communities to engage in these discussions. And then there should also be consequences for exclusion. So we have laws, but then we find out that we see this happening in Nigeria where new governments come in and they actually do not enforce these laws, or they break the laws and there are no repercussions. And this is where civil society must speak up to hold government accountable and to help entrench norms in Nigeria, because I'm a firm believer that actually norms are more important in many times. That if you have social norms that say people that tend to be put on the margins should be centralized and should be elevated when budget decisions are being made, and society comes around to agree on this, we would see things begin to shift. So I'll just end here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you so much, Olinda. Data is not neutral. I think that is really an important thing. Data is not neutral, and budgets are not also neutral. Budgets have an angle. Actually, budgets speak the political nature of a particular country, where, to whom, how they benefit, whose development are they being financed, and the taxes, which we very clearly, Olenka has says, we think that the dominant or the rich are the ones who are actually contributing to the treasury, but the amounts to the treasury are mostly through indirect taxes. And who's paying the indirect taxes? It's the poor, the marginalized. And because all of us who have supposed to be paying income tax, we have access to the auditors who's telling us how not to pay taxes. Right? The real treasury is being really funded by on the one hand, by the most marginalized and the poor, but when it comes to the actual budget expenditure, it is against them. And thank you very much for the wonderful work that you do and for all what you have shared, Olenka. And I hope you will stay on for a few. It looks like all of you have done so well with your time that we'll have sufficient time for Q&A, and we look forward to hearing from you at the time. So I now request Ms. Kendra Jesperson. She is one of the senior directors at the Eurodad and has worked. Specifically, the way we have come across with Eurodad is not only at the very mega level in terms of campaign for debt relief and all that, but in their reach to a very vulnerable group across the continent, and especially in the South Asian continent. They have supported and worked with the Dalit communities in several states, and within the Dalit communities, especially with the community which is specifically been more excluded by their work they call manual scavenging, which is actually forced to clean human excreta. I'm sorry to have these images, human excreta to bare hands. And Eurodad has pushed their voice to a very international levels and brought this up. So it's a very excellent combination of both the ground level traction of working with the most marginalized, but also having mega policies which impact these. So Kendra, just a small thing, of course, you're looking at the outcome document, the debt justice, the debt and the tax justice, what's being discussed, and what are the implications for these marginalized communities. So from Eurodat's perspective, how do the current global discussions on economic justice, including the justice issues such as tax justice, relate to the current relate to broader visions of right to development? As we engage with this macro policy discussions as FFT, how can we ensure that these frameworks are responsive to the realities of communities facing, intergenerational dissent discrimination? And what role can civil society, especially from the marginalized communities, play in making these issues visible in global policy spaces? And how can organizations like Eurodat support these efforts to ensure national level budget allocations are transparent, equitable, and accountable to the most at risk of being left behind? Because of the length of the question, which almost runs to 1.5 minutes, you will have an additional 1 minute to respond. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. Yes, indeed. So Eurodad and myself personally have had the privilege of working in partnership with organizations fighting for Dalit rights in India in the last few years, and by extension with GFoD as well. And I'm very grateful to have the chance to be in this space to share about some of the ways we've been linking together our work to fight for inequalities, fight against inequalities, both within and between countries, and finding ways to connect those daily realities faced by marginalized communities, and especially manual scavenging community, with the demands for system change that Eurodad and its global allies are fighting for. So issues such as debt and tax policies. And just a small correction on your intro to me, you mentioned I work on debt. I work more on tax, so I'll be speaking a bit more about that. And Olyanka gave a nice segue to speak about taxes as well. This FFD process, which brings us together here, is rooted in the need to address economic inequalities. Its origins over 20 years ago lie in the discontent of developing countries with the shortcomings of our economic system. Questions like, how did the world's wealth get so unevenly concentrated? Olyanka mentioned that there's less money to go around. I would add, in fact, there's plenty of money around. It's a question of who is it available to? And why do we have undemocratic and unrepresentative institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, making decisions about economic policies that actually impact the entire world? And when we talk about inequalities, we have to address the global and the localized elements in tandem. If we solve inequalities between countries, this really only matters if the benefits also reach the most marginalized, which requires addressing discrimination. And if we try to solve inequalities within countries without also tackling the systems that allow the rich to dodge taxes or keep countries in unsustainable debt, then our results are going to be limited as well. So it makes sense for us to make these connections between global macroeconomic policy discussions on the one hand and the everyday realities faced by marginalized communities on the other. So here we are at FFD4. It's a rare opportunity to engage in a more democratic space discussing macroeconomic policies, and with the potential to address some of the world's deeply structural, fundamental sources of inequalities. But alas, the outcome document has already been finalized. So it's not the opportunity to influence negotiations in the public eye that we had hoped for, nor has the outcome document achieved the level of ambition that we hoped for. For example, on debt architecture reform, I'll speak briefly on debt. Civil society and many global South countries made really strong calls for a meaningful intergovernmental process towards creating a UN debt convention that would help to address the vastly unequal creditor-dominated system that we currently have. and would contribute to building a system that works in the interests of development goals and public protections. What we got in the outcome document was language referring to an intergovernmental process, but it was stripped of its ambition. So the text no longer referred to the ambition of negotiating a UN debt convention, as was the case in earlier drafts, and instead we're left with a vague promise of engagement with creditors and a focus on making recommendations rather than actually writing a convention. We also hoped to get an agreement on binding rules for responsible lending and borrowing, and we ended up with a working group co-convened by the UN Secretary General, IMF, and World Bank, and we know that these last two are not exactly champions on responsible lending. The text also avoids any reference to the need for debt cancellation. And this is coming in the context of the world's worst debt crisis, which is having devastating impacts on public budgets and people. And so the conversation does not stop here. It's vital for us to continue the strong push for ambitious reform and unconditional debt cancellation. As for our demands on tax issues, the FFD document in itself is not a big step forward, but because we have a separate ongoing negotiation about a new legally binding agreement on tax in the form of a UN convention, the FFD outcome fits into a much larger development that we're actually very hopeful about. But overall, in relation to FFD4, we're deeply disappointed that global North countries have stood in the way of more ambitious reforms to global economic governance, especially on issues such as debt. However, for the tax justice movement, this moment feels familiar. We've actually been here before. So back at the last FFD conference in Addis in 2015, the tax movement was advocating forcefully for an intergovernmental tax body to be formed at the UN and to bring global tax governance into a democratic space at the UN rather than the OECD. And at that time, the negotiations were also, as they are today, strongly polarized in a north-south divide. And while things looked really hopeful at one point, in the last stage, the global North countries managed to crush the proposal for a UN tax body, insisted the OECD should carry on its role, and we know that's an institution where they hold the power. So we didn't get what we wanted as a tax movement. We're terribly disappointed. But we came out with a fresh reaction with the slogan, "See you in New York," because the conversation wasn't over, and nor was the potential to create change. It continued in New York at the UN General Assembly and at every FFD forum since then. And 10 years later, here we are at a pivotal and an actually very hopeful moment for tax justice. We are about to begin negotiations for a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. Years of pressure from civil society and strong leadership from the Africa group of countries and bold resolutions from them to the General Assembly have resulted in a remarkable turning of the tables of power in the last 3 years. And as of last August, we now have an approved terms of reference, not only approved, but they included the majority of the demands being made for many years by civil society in the tax justice movement. So now we're looking ahead to negotiations on the content of this convention starting in August next month and continuing for the next 3 years. We know there are many battles ahead, but we also know there's so much potential for positive change. And this is a chance to prove that these kinds of system-level macroeconomic changes are possible. It's also a chance to get governments around the world to commit to ensuring that all countries' tax systems genuinely serve to lower inequalities. So how does this relate to the broader vision of the right to development? I'm going to focus my answer on tax because I think it holds a significant piece of the puzzle in addressing the need for accountable and people-centered protection that we're talking about today. But it's also an area that I believe provides some hope in otherwise very troubled and gloomy times, as we've spoken about. The objectives in the agreed TOR for the UN Tax Convention states that it should establish an international tax system for sustainable development. So we're setting up a tax system that has a purpose and must be designed to deliver and serve the interests of development. We don't have that right now. We have a tax system that's a legacy from colonial times and which has evolved in the shadows to serve corporations and the rich. In the TOR and in the FFD discussions more broadly, we're now seeing links being made between tax and development, tax and social protection, tax and gender, tax and environment, and tax and human rights. So we're establishing a convention with principles at its foundation. Currently, the Global South countries struggle to generate adequate revenues from taxes because of loopholes in the system that make it next to impossible to tax multinationals that do business in their countries or to tax the rich effectively. So the changes being proposed under the UN Tax Convention will help states to gain access to massive new sources of tax revenue to finance their obligations to citizens to fulfill their right to development. And when we say massive, we mean massive. Tax avoidance and evasion by multinational corporations and wealthy individuals currently are estimated to cost the world $492 billion each year. So an effective tax system is a means of financing development that is both lucrative, very lucrative, and also sustainable. How can we ensure that global frameworks like the UN Tax Convention are responsive to the realities of dissent communities and people facing inequalities? Again, we're fighting for a principle-based system, so one that can't be so easily co-opted by the powerful. The TOR sets the stage really well for this in aiming to help reduce inequalities. It includes a principle that the convention should contribute to equitable results. It also includes commitments to ensuring fair allocation of taxing rights between countries, addressing tax dodging by the rich, preventing illicit financial flows, and it says that tax cooperation should be aligned with human rights obligations. So we've got a good foundation in the terms of reference. If designed well, the convention should provide powerful new options of revenue for governments to pay for services and social protection, and not just turn to regressive taxes, as Paul mentioned. This is a favorite tool. It's one often pushed by creditors, and it disproportionately negatively affects marginalized and discriminated communities. In our work with our partners in India, one of the partners who carried out some awareness raising with people engaged in manual scavenging reported that one of the common feedbacks after the training was, well, we never thought of ourselves as taxpayers because we're too poor. But now we realize we're the biggest taxpayers. So ironically, those least able to pay are often paying the biggest share through regressive taxes, and at the same time being denied the allocations from their government's budgets that are due to them. So there's promise in the UN Convention to lift the pressure off of those least able to bear it. So what is the role for civil society and organizations like Eurodad and supporting marginalized communities? We need our global policy work to be grounded in the reality, the legitimacy, the momentum created from the ground up. So real life examples of the lived reality of economic policies bring life and humanity to policy discussions that can otherwise be abstract. In our work with partners in India over the past few years, we've had a clear division of labor. Each of us brings our own expertise. We work at our respective levels. We don't impose our agendas on each other, but we reinforce each other's demands at national level, global level. Marginalized communities tell us how economic policies affect them. We tell them how national campaigns can reinforce the global ones, and we try our best to bring stories and voices from local realities into the global work. And we found that with the right local civil society translators who are able to translate global policy decisions and developments into language, literally and figuratively, that's relevant to local realities, grassroots level communities are able to articulate their injustices as structural issues and make global interconnections, shifting from narratives of fate and victimhood to narratives of justice. We did not presume that manual scavenging communities would want to engage on tax justice issues on top of their existing policy demands and efforts, but actually this evolved naturally as they felt compelled to take to the streets and join campaigns protesting how unjust the tax system is. An organization like like your dad and others working at the global level, we have a job to do of making tax policy speak accessible to wider audiences, to widening our networks, to creating chances for marginalized voices to be heard in the global space we occupy, and supporting very commendable initiatives like GFoD to represent the voices of dissent communities in UN spaces where they're often not adequately represented by their governments. So in conclusion, let's keep raising those voices. Let's keep raising the bar on ambition. And for the tax justice movement, the dream of a fairer tax system which will benefit the marginalized is within sight. The means to get there kicks off in 1 month, and we look forward to celebrating some revolutionary changes ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I think really we need to celebrate a lot if we have once we have these the international tax justice institution, which will bring in the kind of policies that you have highlighted. How is taxed, the whole aspect of illicit flows and letting taxes are being raised but are not actually realized by the several governments. Such a huge amount. And what you're saying is almost $500 billion are being wasted on taxes, which actually should be brought in for the development. And I think once we have this, we'll really have a great resources, hopefully. And I think the last point is very important. Unless those who are continuously being marginalized turn to demand their due share and raise this and do involve in audits and others like Olenka and Nadire was saying, we are not going to get anywhere. So I think it's really a perfect synchronization of ensuring the macro policies are there, but also once they are there, how are we going to get this off the ground by having traction of communities to completely be aware of what is it that they're contributing to. So, friends, I'm happy that we have all the panelists have given some time to ensure that we have some Q&A. I request Pranjali and Carla to see if we can have interpretation for another 10 more minutes so that we have some space for questions. Because of time, I would request very sharp questions, 30 seconds. More than that, it will become another presentation, which we can have later, but you can put it. So the space is open for questions, quick questions, specific targeted questions. And I will have 1 minute each for each of the panelists to quickly respond. Pranjali, just help me if there are any specific questions that are already there in chat, and if any, please raise your hand so that Pranjali can recognize and allow. I think we have some. Pranjali, will you be able to request them?
Hello, hi, I'm Shimoy, and thank you so much to everyone, with the disclaimers, of course, that it was a wonderful panel to hear. I did have one question directed to all the panelists, and this is something that I'm also working on in my own research, is the role of allyship, especially because we have talked a lot about civil actors, about civil societies, about political parties being a part of this movement. I also want to understand more iteratively how, because most of these places have people from relatively privileged caste backgrounds sitting and occupying these positions. And I want to know the role allyship can play, not simply as making these people as extractive data, but also at the same time sort of cohesively building it. And how can people who have historically borne the privilege be able to work cohesively with the communities? Thank you so much again, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you. Next question. We will take all the questions and then we will have 1 minute each for the panelists to respond. Yes. Any others?
Paul, there are some questions in the chat box as well.
Okay. Also, I heard Czech Siddharthi also wanted to raise a question. I do not know if he's here.
Yeah, he's here. I'll just ask him to unmute.
Hola, ¿me escucha?
Hola. Yeah, please.
Soy Shashidati Hamadi from Mauritania.
Please go ahead. Quickly.
I'm going to speak in Spanish or in English?
Whichever, please. We have
Buenos
interpretation.
días. Buenos días. Me llamo Shashidati Hamadi de Mauritania. Estoy muy contento de estar aquí para participar en esta conferencia muy importante para la protección social de la CWD en Mauritania particularmente. Y quiero solamente saber exactamente lo que es posible hacer de una manera internacional para ayudar la CWD en Mauritania para que obtengan de una manera inclusiva la protección social, porque la protección social en Mauritania es una cosa muy, muy complicada y que no es suficiente. Porque si ponemos o miramos, por ejemplo, la estadística, solamente el 9% de la población de Mauritania que beneficia de la protección social. Y sin protección social no se puede, por ejemplo, cuidar si está enfermo y no se puede beneficiar también de cuando se retira del trabajo, beneficia de la protección para poder estar en seguridad. Entonces, quiero saber una cuestión muy simple, porque no tenemos mucho tiempo, saber cuál la posibilidad de la comunidad internacional y las ONG internacionales para que ayuden la población de CW de Mauritania para que beneficien de una manera muy, 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 muy importante, inclusiva, de la protección social. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Siddharthi. There are one or two questions in the chat. I think you might look at that. One by Prabhakar Kolpudi. Primarily, he's looking at what are the meaningful, sustained public participation throughout the right to development process, and how do we ensure governments, especially political leaders and bureaucrats, are actively engaged and held accountability. So what are the possible accountability processes? So we have four, I think, one from the chat. Oh no, there's one more question that I see is from Sri Mastuti. Primarily looking at how do we ensure a reliable intersectional disaggregated data, how can we nudge the governments to have this kind of data efficiently collected at both the subnational and national levels. Yeah, so we have 5 questions, so I will go the reverse order if you're okay. So start with Kendra. Please, you have 1 minute.
Okay, thanks. I'll maybe start with the last question, or the second last question. The last one was not for me. So the one on meaningful and sustained participation and how to hold political leaders and bureaucrats accountable. From the perspective of our work, I think the moving things to the UN, we're working on that for tax. We're working on it for debt, for development cooperation as well, is a way of holding governments accountable better and having better participation, because the UN is a structure where there is opportunity for civil society to contribute to discussions, to make interventions. there's the opportunity for these discussions to be public and transparent, for media to have access. A lot of existing economic governance conversations have happened behind closed doors with very little transparency about what wheeling and dealing and trading is going on between governments. And once that comes into the public space, governments have to behave better, and we can do a lot more to hold them accountable for what they say and use the media and public attention to hold them accountable. So yeah, that's a big part of why we are engaging with UN processes. And on the question on allyship and how to ensure that people from marginalized backgrounds get more space, I think, yeah, in our work, it's something we try to reflect on a lot. We also try to keep ourselves in our own places. So in Eurodad, we represent European CSOs towards European governments. We try to focus on limiting the damage that European governments cause on the rest of the world. We then try to give as much space and attention and autonomy to other civil society organizations representing marginalized groups, especially to be the experts on their space. We do not want to encroach on their territory. And yeah, my experience in the project we've worked on recently is that there are some very powerful voices from marginalized communities. When you give them the means to articulate their situation, linking it to global issues, they can and do. And when you give them the microphone, they will knock you down. So yeah, we need more of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kendra. Olenka?
Thank you so much. I'll just try and give 2 examples to address this question of how we collect national level intersectional sex disaggregated data. So first of all, I think sustained advocacy actually has an impact. So for example, recently, the Federal Inland Revenue Service in Nigeria set up a gender desk and also has committed to collecting disaggregated data by sex. And how did this happen? Through sustained advocacy. So one of the groups we work with in Nigeria is the Society of Women in Taxation, which is a group of women in taxation. And we've been supporting them to build the advocacy side of their work. And through that sustained advocacy, through research produced, briefs, holding of annual conferences where they actually invite the Federal Inland Revenue Tax authorities and other tax authorities. We've been hammering on that question of how important gender is. And so they took this step of setting up this desk and collecting gender disaggregated data. So advocacy does work. Secondly, sometimes you have to collect the data yourselves. So for example, in Nigeria, we have a case where government actually provides input to smallholder farmers in the form of fertilizer, improved seedlings, but then there is no comprehensive database. And then because of that, we have what we call political farmers who get these allocations. And these are people that many of them are actually not even farmers or smallholder farmers. And so working with the Small Scale Women Farmers Organization of Nigeria, we're actually helping to develop a database, a comprehensive database. And we're not doing it on our own as IBP. We're involving the communities in the process. Their data, we're training them as data enumerators. They're involved in the design of the data collection process, the framework. And because of that, they own the process as well. And then we're able to produce a database that involves government in the process of developing this framework as well. And so they're willing to take it on and use it for allocating input to farmers. So those are 2 examples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olenka. Very, very clear. Yes, Nadire, please.
Yes, I would start with the question on meaningful and sustained public participation and how to keep governments accountable. and senior leaders. Very quickly on this question, we created business clubs, Roma business clubs, who act as the voice of the Roma entrepreneurs' needs. And I think in each of the layers at the governments, we need to be present, and we need to show the needs of the people that are at the bottom, because we know that at the top, people are creating policies, they have their political wills and agendas, and then when it comes to realization of what they have promised, there is nothing happening. We can see a piece of paper which has very good strategies developed, very good support programs, but then in practice, we don't see the result, and the voice is missing. So business clubs we used as one of the mechanism, but besides the business clubs, outside of the entrepreneurship, I would say we really need to create cadre from the underserved communities that will be placed in the higher job positions in all these ministries, public institutions, because we are lacking our voices there, and we need to be part of the decision-making processes so that we can have insight, let's say, insight pushing forward for the advocacy efforts that we are doing. From the outside world, of course, civil society all the time is having its own advocacy campaigns, in advocacy targets that we are pushing, but we need to be also inside. On the other side, on the question on the social protection, what's specific to be done to obtain the social protection? I see different countries have different programs when it comes to social protection. I would avoid this in two parts. One, social protection, which is should be designed for communities that are in a very bad conditions at the margin, but other and the amounts should be increased, and there should be different levels of amounts that will be provided to social beneficiaries to pass the transitioning from being a social beneficiary to becoming employed or entrepreneur and becoming self-sustainable person. Because what we see, usually people who are social beneficiaries, they are mostly trying to survive from day to day, and they are doing informal activities, and they don't want to go out of the informal sector because they don't want to lose the social protection. So there should be some transitioning mechanism while designing the social protection benefits for people, allowing to transit to the formal sector, to the formal employment, and to formal entrepreneurship activities. So this is very, very briefly from my side. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that balance. I think this is a very critical balance that we show that we continue this transition well. Baishali, are you there? Yes, I think I can see you. Can you open your... Yeah, please.
Yes, I'm there. Probably I would like to add on to the question on social protection. So Mauritania is also has a ILO office. So ILO is a tripartite organization, meaning that it is represented by the government. We have represent from the government, employers, and workers' organization, mostly represented through trade unions. So if you can also kindly find out who are the central trade unions in our country who represent the voices and the concerns that you have raised in your question. And also you can reach out to the program unit of your ILO country office. So that would be the possible next steps for you to understand what is the level of social protection in your country for your for the occupational group that you're looking into. What is where you stand and what can be done as the possible next steps. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Baishali. And now we come to the UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Suryadeva. I think a few insights that you further like to give in conclusion.
Thank you, Paul. In the interest of time, I'll be very brief. I think most of the questions have already been answered, but let me make a couple of overarching points in response to these questions. One is the lived experiences of communities that are excluded or marginalized. They matter quite a lot in advocacy, in building alliances. And I think it's critical that we highlight those lived experiences and we build on it. Sometimes exposing those who have privileged positions, bringing them to these communities and experience firsthand those experiences, and I mean positive experiences as well, not merely negative, but success stories, is also a very powerful way to build alliances and allies so that they become the agents of change, as Nadira already highlighted. So I think those issues are very crucial. My last point is about accessibility. Sometimes the UN institutions are not seen accessible. Many are not, especially if one has to travel to Geneva or New York. It's very expensive. And sometimes, even if you find funds, you may not get a visa. So I think it is critical to make the UN system use better. And that's where the special procedures, for instance, can be very useful in terms of accessibility and all that. So thank you very much for convening this. I would say to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you all so much for taking your time. I see, earlier I saw 52, 53, and now I'm seeing 49, which means the attrition is very low, and the interest that all of you have continued to have on this is very, very strengthening, especially from the perspective of marginalized. All too completely complex, and then feel okay, we should focus on more on social issues, we should focus on violence, on exclusion, on all the negativities we are finding. I think it is impossible actually in some ways when you look on the one side to experience all this, and yet also to talk about some of these to the people who are causing some of these. So I think in that side, it is very, very critical that this kind of a macro picture and analyzing that, which is impacting on the national, as well as bringing our voices both to the macro as well as designing and ensuring that we have micro suggestions so that the inclusion and the agency of these communities is highly engaged. And I think the spectrum of panelists that we are fortunate to have had have brought those several angles to us. But we need these shifts to take place. Shifts from our side, the community side, to shift from only one angle to actually to look at us as Nadira very clearly pointed out, we are not the problem. We are the missing opportunity for you, and then we give these suggestions very clearly, but also hold them accountable, have audits, but also speak to them. That's what I think we have, what Professor Surya was saying, that we have these institutions, but we also have allies. We also have ensuring there are people who have this perspective to ensure, give these vivid experiences to be brought to them. So thank you so much to all the panelists by name for making these very, very interesting. I hope we will try to consolidate these and then put together in a small video, because a very, very fascinating insights that have come from all your presentations, Professor Surya, Baishali, Nadira, Olanke, and Kendra. Thank you all so much for this time. And thank you to the interpreters, because we are cutting across French and Portuguese and English and several other languages. Of course, sorry to say that all these are colonial languages we are still hanging on, but still, these are our communication lines. And thank you so much for the interpreters for staying on. I would like to thank Pranjali and that backend team who has made the platform and managed it very well. And finally, I would like to thank Dinesh, who connected with each of the panelists, who brought us together and gave this very good. So a big thank you to Dinesh and all of you for taking the time to ask questions, to listen, and to say. And I'm sure we will really make this. We will not give up. We'll fight for the policies, but also we will give solutions at all levels, including the traction that we need at the ground level. Jai Bhim, Uhuru, Lentai, and Opera Roma, these are all slogans of our people from different continents. Jai Bhim, Opera Roma. Thank you.